a particular meeting, and she confronted him. She said, "Mr. Prime Minister," she pointed her finger in his face. She said, "Mr. Prime Minister," she said, "you are drunk." And at that point he was. He looked at the woman. He said, "Yes, ma'am." He said, "I am. And you are ugly. But in the morning, I will be sober." Okay. A couple people get all that. Now, okay. There is a reason for telling the jokes other than hopefully getting us off on a hopefully good foot. There is a pedagogical purpose for this. There's the word for you for the day. Pedagogy, pedagogical. And since you guys may have an additional screen, you want to look that word up. I had this before, but I finally got it. Okay, good. All right. So there is a teaching purpose for this. Pedagogical is another word for teaching. And the teaching purpose is the jokes were hopefully fairly fun and amusing, even though I told you that somebody else told them, right? I referenced my source. I told you it was Winston Churchill. I told you it was Abraham Lincoln. I told you it was Mark Twain. Hopefully it didn't make the jokes any less funny, right? And hopefully, actually, in some ways, it sometimes makes the joke a little funner when you know where it came from. And or it makes it just a little more amusing or a little bit more, makes you sound a little bit more intellectual, I suppose, if you can share who told the joke. And the reason for all of this is that not necessarily in my class, and I'll say why in a minute, but if you do use some material from somebody else, like in my case, the joke, make sure and reference where you got that material from. If you don't, you can be in a lot of trouble. It's called plagiarism. If you do, it generally doesn't make you look any less smart. In fact, actually, if you can take, even in our particular profession, if you can take a chunk of somebody else's design, especially if it's out there in the public domain, and you can package it and then add some additional material to it to make it even better, okay? At that point, you've gotten further along than the other person has. But you do need to be very careful to make sure and reference that material and make sure that it's in the public domain so that you can use it. So like some of the labs, for example, we'll give you some code. You can feel free to go ahead and use the code that we provide, but you will need to do your own work to add additional materials to it, okay? So hopefully the jokes made things a little easier and funner coming in. The one thing I remember, though, like I said about, I remember on the first couple of the services that we had online with our church, the pastor got up and he said, "It's okay." He said, "I'm used to telling jokes and not hearing anybody laugh." So it's kind of like, yeah, that's kind of the way it goes. I didn't realize how accurate he was as I kind of get up here and try and talk to you guys. But anyway, all right. So let's get into the meat of the matter here. I actually changed my cursor so it would be a little bit bigger. You can see it hopefully easier on the screen. And basically, this is all the material that you guys have seen already. You know what you're doing. We are going to be talking off of an Intel x86, which is now kind of an old machine. But again, the idea is to work with something that's a little older, a little easier, something you guys can catch up with. And trust me, it's not going to be too easy. I guarantee it. But getting the idea of kind of how an assembly language works. Assembly language is kind of, I think we talked about it a little bit in 210, at least in my 210 class. But as you pushed into this sort of thing, you found that there's kind of the C programming language, which is even a little bit lower language these days. And then there's what's called machine code, and that's ones and zeros. And we'll talk a little bit about how those things work. And they interact with what's called assembly language. Assembly language is unique typically to the processor that you're using, hence the reference here that the assembly language program for the Intel x86 device is what we're going to be referencing. And again, these are older type machines, but hopefully they're a little easier to keep up with. Actually, we're gonna have plenty of time talking about these anyway. But we're going to kind of try and get you into the assembly language programming, and you're going to get some of that in class. You're going to get some of that in the lab. So this is going to be where we're going to live for a little while. We'll go to a little bit higher level language. We'll go to C language as we work on. But again, with the C programming language, it's going to be just, we want to get you started with understanding that you go from C into assembler, and from assembler then into the, not shown here, to the binary stuff, the ones and zeros, that the computer world is. Okay? So in either event, We'll be talking about some of these other things as well, of course. We will have a library. We will have a lab. And as I already mentioned, we're not going to have a discussion tomorrow. That is canceled. But we will have our first discussion a week from Friday. We'll have 2 more lecture sessions before we get to the discussion session. So hopefully we can help lay the groundwork for you a little bit better for all of that. All right. So, and we will be talking a little bit about how to design your own computer board. We'll see how that all comes this semester. It's going to be a little bit trickier doing it all online, but I think a lot of it can be done online. And so we're going to try and work to steer the class to do exactly that. Okay. I'm your instructor. The best way to get a hold of me is texting. In fact, I already got a text from a student. I think they may have seen the slides put up on board on here. As an adjunct, I don't have a lot of office hours, but what I have done that's worked reasonably well in the past is I will do my best to begin and put the opening meeting up at 5 p.m. I will do my best to be here at 5 every evening. So that'll give us a full half hour before class begins. And then after class, I'll stick around for some time and we'll try and answer any questions you might have then. For additional assistance, again, we can set up an appointment as needed, and or texting is probably the best way to get hold of me. And I'm going to explain this piece up here in a minute. The teaching assistant is going to be Sravani. We're going to set it. She's going to try and set some office hours, and she'll let you know what those are at your first discussion. We're going to use the UMBC Blackboard, of course. You're already here to host the course materials for this lecture. I just find it interesting to put this in the syllabus because by the time you guys see this in the syllabus, you're here, hopefully. So hopefully not tell you anything you're going to do. But anyway, lectures on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 5:30 to 6:45. The discussions will be beginning next Friday at 9 a.m. to 10:50, and then a lab from 11 to 11:50. Okay, so exams in the time of COVID. These two things go together here. What I'm going to do in order to try and bring the exam, what's what I want to use, accountability, credibility, there you go, to kind of the highest level, is I'm going to ask if you can secure the help of a proctor of some kind. I don't think any of you are probably living completely by yourself at this stage of the game. If you have a roommate, that counts. A brother or a sister who's at least 18 will count. Your parents are ideal. I had a lot of people, who are staying home during the time of COVID and so forth, and their parents are available. If your parent can sit down with you to kind of help you go over the quiz or the exam, that would be greatly appreciated. What I will do is at the beginning of every quiz and exam, and we'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute, I'm now adding this proctor agreement form. I think did I put one up on the Blackboard already? If I didn't, I don't think I did. I will put a copy of that up on Blackboard. And what we'll do is, so that you can look at it closer. I mean, this is kind of shrunk down to fit in the slide. But again, the main goal is that you'll put in the time that your quiz, your exam begins and the date. And then when you're all done, you'll fill that in as well. I want to know basically where you're taking it from. And then whoever your proctor is, they will then, let's see, you put your name, your ID number, your phone, your email. You'll sign that says basically, hey, you're here. And then your proctor will also sign if we can. Can the proctor form be signed digitally like on my iPad during the stylus? You can certainly sign it using a stylus. That's fine. On the iPad, that's fine. The trickiest part, of course, is to go around and get it back to me. If you can send me a JPEG file, that's easiest, or a PDF file is fine, something where I can kind of see the whole thing. I do know that probably the easiest things for you, okay, good. The easiest things for, somebody said PDF will be great. For you guys, it's probably easiest if you can print it out and then write on it. But if you got a stylus, if you want to work on the screen, that's fine too. And then scan it back in and send it to me. I realize that not everybody's got a printer or a scanner. Without a scanner, what you can do is even just take a picture of it with your cell phone, right? And then download that to your computer and send me a series of pictures of the page. If there's more than one page, well, I want a picture of the proctor agreement. For example, the quiz is hopefully going to be only a single page or two, but you'll want to return then to me the completed proctor form and the quiz, however many pages it is. And if you have to, just take a picture with your cell phone and email that to me. And that will get emailed then to my school address. I don't even have that here. The school address is W.H. Smith, the number 3 at umbc.edu. I'm sorry, I've gotten so out of using that, but I will. That's the best place then to send your quizzes and exams. And then what I do is I'm going to have a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet's going to have a line for each question. And if you get the question right, then I'll just delete the stuff on that line. But let's say for a problem that you get wrong, it'll be up to either, typically a typical problem would be worth 4 or 5 points. And I'll mark off how many points you're getting off for that particular problem. And then, but I will then put in I will have the answer then for that problem in that particular line that you got wrong, so you can see what the right answer is and make corrections for the future. Okay. Don't do a lot with homework. It's a little scary that way, and I apologize. Again, the adjunct sort of kind of thing. But the quizzes are worth only 2.5% of your grade. So give it your best shot. Give me the quiz, and we'll have a couple of quizzes to kind of get you into the feel of how things work, and hopefully help you get the lay of the land so that when we get to the midterm, which will count a little bit more, then you'll be ready for that. In fact, let me roll on. Okay, any questions about at least how I'm going to do the grading here during COVID? Okay, Anthony?
Yeah, it said something online about a 48-hour window in case, like, you don't have a proctor.
That's right. If your proctor can't be available at the time, then yes, I will leave the quiz of the exam up for 48 hours. Again, I will request, and this is something that you're signing off with your proctor, that you not look at the quiz or the exam until you go to take it. All right. And so you're signing, when you put your signature on there, you're kind of promising that, in fact, that you haven't done that. That's also in the proctor exam form. But once you're ready, then you can sit down with the proctor anytime within that 48-hour period and take the exam. Make sure you get it back in the mail to me within 48 hours. Email to me back to me. So I won't be accepting anything more than 48 hours after I put it up. And at 48 hours, pretty precisely, I will pull the quiz or the exam down. So it will no longer be available. Okay. And then the other problem, though, is if you don't do it on the evening when we're here, obviously I won't be around to answer questions that you might have on the quiz or the exam. So it's in your best interest to try and do that. But hey, if you need to work with a proctor on that. And one other thing, too, let me share this up front, and I did at the end of last semester as well. For anybody that you can get to help you proctor, please give them my profound thanks, because you guys are helping to ensure the academic process. And this is an integrity issue. And we appreciate you guys a lot, and we appreciate the proctors that help improve our integrity quite a lot. And so anybody that can be available to do that, I want to make sure and give them my strong thank you as well. So please pass that on for me to whoever you can talk to about being a proctor. Okay, thank you. All right. So we'll come back a little bit more about quizzes and exams going forward, but the text at this point, I really don't rely too much on the textbook. I think you could probably even get some of this information online in terms of the Intel microprocessor. So it might be good to have a bit of you might Google a little bit of it when you got a little bit of homework time tonight, because we're doing a lot of homework at this point after tonight. But be good to read up on that, and especially assembly language for the x86 processors will be a helpful information to have. And so we'll be trying to keep available for that. So like I was talking about the grading scheme, midterms worth 15%, final exams 20%. Altogether, the quizzes well, they're not going to have assignments. Altogether, the in-class quizzes will be 10%, 2.5% each for each of the quizzes. I will give a 5% in-class participation. Almost everybody's going to get that, okay? So if I have happened to notice that you aren't showing up, then you might be a little worried about it. Ditto for the discussion participation. The lab assignments will be 45% of your grade in total. So depending on however many assignments you have, I think they each count equally. Let's see. 2-day delay policy for discussion homework will result in declining percentage. So when she says it's due, you have 2 days to get in to submit your discussion homework, your lab results. Actually, she'll tell you when it's due. If you turn it in by the time it's due, you'll get the full percentage. You'll have 24 hours after that, you'll lose 5%. If you turn it in 48 hours late, you're going to lose 25%. And otherwise stated, anything that's submitted more than 2 days late will receive a 0. We're going to hold that pretty hard. Not absolutely, but very, very hard. So, and again, we're going to scramble a little bit this semester. This might get a little bit soft, but that's going to be the goal we're going to try very hard to shoot for. Okay. All right. So what do we got going here? Here we go. All right. We're going to avoid incomplete grades if at all possible. Academic misconduct. You guys know about that as bad as I do for the most part. Oh, it's well. The main thing we're looking for is when you sign your proctor agreement that you're going to live up to the word that you promise. Here's kind of the tentative schedule that we have. Tonight we're doing the introduction. We'll do Tuesdays and Thursdays the first quiz. We're going to give you the whole hour for the quiz. And the quiz won't last the whole hour, I'm sure. It will only be 5 questions. All the quizzes will be 5 questions. The midterm will be 20 questions. And the final exam will be 25 questions. Oh, and there's one other. Our quizzes during class, yes. So quiz 1 we'll devote the entire class to each one of the quizzes. And so because the quiz is only 5 questions long, probably you'll get out early on the nights that we have a quiz. All right. If things are looking really good by the time we get to Thanksgiving, I may give you Tuesday off. We'll see. Probably not at this stage of the game, but we'll see how we're doing as we roll on ahead here. I don't think for the moment, we're just planning to take Thanksgiving off on Thursday, the 14th. What I will do is I will have an option to have an early final exam the week before the scheduled final exam. The last day of class will be on Tuesday, the 8th of December. Maybe I don't know. We'll see what we can work out with this. I may give it some more thought. And there's one other policy that I have that's a bit unique. And yes, it works for any quiz or any exam. But you only get to do this on one problem in the given quiz or exam. And the way this policy works is if you have absolutely no clue what the answer is to the problem in front of you, you can put in a joke instead, and you will get 1 point for the joke out of the 5 possible for the problem. Now, if you put any guess in there at all, other than a joke, you'll get probably at least 1 point, okay? But if you really have no clue, you don't even know where to start, rather than pretending like you know where to start, go ahead and put the joke in. But you only get that on 1 problem per quiz or exam. So like if you've got 2 problems you don't know, sorry, you're out of luck on the second problem. You can only put it in for 1 of the problems. And the reason I do this is, well, a couple of fold. And to tell you the tale here, one of the things that I have a good time with, okay, one of the things I have a good time with is it's not infrequent where I get to see some of you guys over at Northrop Grumman in a year or 2 or 3. And I've been teaching this class for about 6 years now, and I have met now more than 31 of my former students at Northrop, just so that you know.
I'm actually already here.
Ah, there you go.
Like right now. Right now, I'm calling in from there.
From Northrop?
Yep.
Who am I talking to?
Anthony Johns.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I'm down in AMUC.
Oh, really? All right.
Yeah.
We just kind of moved the engineering over to West Quest D.
Okay.
You know? But yeah, okay, Anthony. But actually, the worst part about it is the best way to recognize people is by I see them. Not infrequently, they'll come up and they'll see me earlier, and they'll remember me from class. But Anthony, if you see me, yeah, say hi by all means. I'm not over there all that much, obviously, these days. But hopefully next semester maybe we'll see each other, or we'll see how it all goes. So bottom line is, one of my former students, kind of a proper young lady, she was talking to me. Can we put down a joke about a question that was mostly know how to solve to act as a buffer? No. You only get one joke. It's worth only one. It's not even worth one additional point. I mean, anything else. So if you put, if you got 2 points from actually starting the problem and got that far along with it, then I'm not going to add another point on if you got a joke. So it's only if you have no clue at all. Okay. And sorry about it, that it's not to add on. In fact, I had one mother who was a proctor last semester that came back and she said, Professor Smith, she said, my son had 2 jokes on there. How come he didn't get 2 points? And I said, well, number one, let me finish explaining it. I said, I enjoyed the points. I enjoyed the jokes, but sometimes they're just for fun anyway. Does it have to actually be funny? Okay, we'll talk about that in just a second. Give me your best shot at making it funny, and I need to qualify the joke here a little bit too. So let me continue with this policy. It's kind of fun to explain anyway. So this young lady, again, I ran into her. She's one of my first students, and I put this policy out there. And I happened to run into her at Northrop, and we were chatting. And she said, Professor Smith, she said, I want you to know. She said that I thought that putting a joke on an exam was a very kind of frivolous thing to do. She didn't think it was a proper thing to do to put a joke on an exam. And she really wasn't happy with the policy that I had instituted. And then she continued and she said, until she got to the final exam. And in point of fact, she said she got to a question on the final exam, and believe it or not, she had no clue what the answer was, exactly like we talked about. And that reminds me of one other thing I got to tell you about the answer sheets here. And so she went to her answer sheet. I got to talk to you about that too in a second. She went to her answer sheet. She looked up her joke. She said she started to write it in on the problem. And as she wrote the joke in on the problem, all of a sudden, because she was thinking a little differently than before, she looked at the problem and she realized, by golly, she knew what the answer was after all. And so, because she did know what the answer was after all, she kind of scribbled the joke out and went ahead and wrote in the answer to the problem. So she said that she actually thought it was pretty clever, because what happens is if you get stuck and you start to look for the joke, it kind of changes the way you're thinking a little bit. And she said, and then you come back to look at the problem kind of with fresh eyes. And she said, occasionally you can figure out what the answer is because you spent a minute thinking about the joke. And she said, she looked at me, she said, Professor Smith, that's really very clever. She said she approved of it. She appreciated my thinking on it. And I kind of smiled at her and I said, you know what? I enjoy the jokes too. Believe it or not, it makes it a lot easier to do the grading. So if you get to the end and you didn't get to use the joke, if you want to go ahead and write it in anyway, that will be appreciated too. Now, one question you asked is if the joke has to be funny. Yeah, dude, give it your best shot. Usually I wind up smiling a little bit. It's kind of fun. The thing is, though, that these jokes have to be 110% politically correct. Okay? They have to be the kind of joke you would tell your grandmother. All right? You don't want any sexist or racist or, I'm trying to say, these are the kind of jokes that you would share in a board meeting with a higher up boss. Okay? If you're so inclined to do that sort of thing. And, or like I said, your grandmother's a good litmus test for you guys. And then you might avoid political jokes too, because if I'm from the wrong party, I'm not sure I'm going to appreciate the joke very much. All right. So this season's going to be a little tough to steer clear of political jokes with the election coming up, but do your best. And I'm sure you can find some stuff. Usually people go looking them up and spend just a minute or two finding a joke online. It's not hard. Now, one other thing I missed in talking about, and that is the answer sheet. So the way the answer sheet works is, and it's written, this is also covered, by the way, in the Proctor agreement, is that for each quiz, I don't want you to have an open book. I don't want you to be online. For the quiz, I want you to put everything that you need to know for that quiz on a single piece of paper, front and back, 8.5 by 11. Some people ask me, can I use a 12 by 14? No, 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, front and back. You can write down by hand. You can print it out on your printer. Not unusual where people take a bunch of the slides, and I will let you know which slides to pay close attention to for the quiz or the exam. So it's not inconceivable. You can kind of shrink all those slides down and put them all on a piece of paper. Whatever works for you. I don't care what you put on that paper. You might want to sneak your joke in a little corner somewhere if you're so inclined. But you can have one sheet of paper for each quiz. And when you get to the midterm, you can have 2 sheets of paper to put your information on. And then when we get to the final, you will be able to have 4 sheets of paper to put all the information on. Okay. Also, I will guarantee that there will be at least 1 question from each previous quiz on the midterm and on the final. Okay, so by the time we get down to the final, there will be 4 questions on the final that will be from previous quizzes. Now, it's not going to be the exact same answer. You're going to have to do some computation, put some different numbers in, fill in different numbers, that kind of thing. But the question will be of the same format. So make sure once you do your quizzes and you get your answers back, hang on to those because they will be useful. And your sheets that you prepare for quiz 1 and quiz 2, for example, will be useful for your midterm. There'll be a little bit of additional information after quiz 2 by the time we get to the midterm, so you'll probably want to update your sheet a little bit as you go on into your 2 sheets as you go into the midterm, and again, your 4 sheets as you go into the final exam. All right? But I found that making those worksheets is a good exercise. It kind of makes you think about the problems you're going to be facing. It makes you kind of think through, okay, what are going to be the key things I'm going to want to have? You don't have to memorize something like powers of 2. In fact, a good thing to put on your sheet is powers of 2 table. In fact, I'm going to give you one of those on one of the slides as we get into the lectures, not today, but in the coming days. So powers of 2 worksheet would be helpful. Other kinds of sorts of materials, and then of course what we cover in the lectures. And like I said, when we get ready to take on quiz number 1, I'll have a summary slide that talks about what particular. When we get to the end of lecture 4, there'll be a summary slide that will be steering you into what you'll need to make sure and cover for quiz number 1. All right. I think that's most of the class procedure at this point that I can think of to cover. Let's see. Are there any? Now, let me ask one other quick question here. Have some of you had me for 212 or 210 before? Up thumb or something if you had me for 210? Nobody? Oh, I have more. I noticed at least 1 former student I thought on my list. Although they may not be here. There's only 20 of 21 people here. So, all right. Well, anyway, does everybody understand how that works? You can ask me any questions now about it, and I can answer them later on. I will probably go over it again when we get ready to do the quiz, the first quiz. So, but I think that's most of what I wanted to tell you guys about exams and quizzes. All right. So let's roll on in. I do have the calendar is posted as a separate PDF on the on Blackboard. You have the copy of it here, obviously, from the first day's slides. And I've got the syllabuses up there. And then I'll make sure and put up the a copy of the Proctor agreement form, so you'll have that. You'll be able to read that easier. All right. So that's most of the mechanics for the course. I'm going to roll on in then to the to what we're actually talking about here. What's a computer? I suppose a lot of you guys, I'm going to ask another thing for thumbs up. I know I was just talking to Alex earlier on, and he was explaining he was just finished building his own machine, and he's gone back to the laptop so he can talk to me rather than trying to watch the machine. But I'm going to ask, go ahead and throw out a thumbs up if you've built your own machine in the past. Please. Okay, I got at least 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. 7, 8, 9. Okay. This summer. 10, 11. Okay, I got all right. So almost half of you have. Now, for those of you, 12. Okay, so we're talking more than half. For those of you who have not, take a close note of all the thumbs up that are there right now. And especially if you know 1 or 2 of those people, they're going to be helpful resources. And for those of you who had, congratulations. It's kind of an interesting, a fun experience. I'm going to tell you it's not as hard to build them now as it used to be, but they're still a good thing to do. Adult Legos. Good point, Sean. I'll take that. I'll take that one. For those of you who have, you realize that you're going to get your CPU, right? You're going to buy your CPU. You're going to put it on your motherboard. Your motherboard's kind of the box that we have here in the middle. You're going to have to buy some memory and put that in your machine. And most of you understand, even if you haven't built your own machine, that those are 3 of the main components. There's actually another component that I think that does some memory storage that's not shown here that might be, I haven't mentioned just yet, but it does store a large amount of memory for your machine. And I was talking about memory in terms of RAM, but there's another type of memory that's not shown in the, it probably goes together in the memory storage, but can anybody suggest what that other type of memory might be? GPU. No, I'm looking for memory. Something that stores all your files and stuff. Cache. Cache is on the way in and out of the processor. That would be your RAM sticks and so forth. Then there's some cache on the RAM. SSD. There we go. And or the hard drive, right? Yeah, HDD works too. SSD or HDD. Something that you store your solid state. Yeah, SSD, solid state drive. Yes, SSD stands for solid state drive. So your hard drive basically is what's not shown here, whether it's a solid state drive or a hard drive. The older mechanical type, especially if you're cheap like me. I actually put 1 of each in my machine. So anyway, by the way, if you do have a hard drive and you didn't have SSD, I mean, it's one of the things I did in building my own machine is I put my operating system on my SSD, and then I got a nice, really large regular hard drive. And that's where I keep like all my files and all the stuff that the videos and all that kind of good stuff. All right, but there's some input to this whole thing. There's the keyboard, your mouse, okay, touch screen and so forth. That counts too. Outputs, there's your monitor, there's your printer, there's your speaker. Actually, opposite the speaker on an input would be the microphone that I'm using right now. And another kind of sort of input device probably would be again, the camera and the keyboard and the microphone. Oftentimes, those things come bundled together. And I know that Alex was talking about getting one for his desktop, and that'll be something that you want to be looking forward to. Okay, all right. So you guys know a lot of this stuff, but just kind of refresh your memory here. Inside the CPU, there's 2 usually typical kind of fundamental pieces. The ALU, which is what does the math. Okay, performs the arithmetic and logic operations. It's what allows your computer to kind of think a little bit, sort of thing, and apply values to the thing. And then there's a control unit. The control unit, there's actually a full cycle that goes into this whole thing where it fetches instructions from memory, it decodes them, and then it executes the instructions. And that may mean there's going to do some work with the ALU. It may just be that it's kind of pushing information around. Depends on what the instruction is. And again, we're going to look at some of these instruction sets as we push into the further discussion. And then the note here that the control unit calls on the arithmetic unit, the ALU, when it needs to do so. And then so many people were talking about cache. Yep, there's and actually even here for the data, but again, not shown, and I probably should change this and show it. There's the hard drive where a lot of the information comes. The hard drive, then if you're going to double click, for example, on running, say, PowerPoint, what's going to happen is then that's going to be your mouse input. The processor is going to say, oh, hey, the CPU, this control unit is going to say, hey, I need to start up this program called PowerPoint. It's going to go out to the hard drive and say, can you please give me some of the key elements to your PowerPoint? and put it out here in my storage area, and or some of this cache actually is probably going to sit over here inside the CPU these days. But some of that will get loaded in, and then the control unit will begin to run the instructions it needs to run in order to operate your PowerPoint. And but as it needs more, it can come back out here to the cache and get a little bit more if it's kind of burned through the instructions it already has. And or if it really has to, it can go all the way back out to the hard drive and ask the hard drive for more information if it's already burned through multiple levels of information that it needs to get PowerPoint started. So that's kind of how this whole thing works here. There are different types of computing systems and different types of computers. Now, you guys, these days, there's a lot of different kinds. There's the more general purpose computing systems. There's your your desktop, your laptop. They still have mainframes and servers around servers in particular. These are the guys that help support the internet and the backbone of the internet and intelligently distribute information around. And then there are mainframes still out there where you've got a large type computer, large type company or something, or even a mid-sized company that has needs for some extra processing. They can get a little bit more than a bunch of workstations if they need it. Systems for dedicated functions. Usually they're embedded in larger electronic devices. In fact, CMPE 311 deals a lot, is specifically dedicated to working with embedded systems and talking about those. And there's some tricks to that. We can talk, you'll learn more about them when you get over to 311. So they do, because they go into specific embedded systems and devices, they're a lot more varied in the way that they work, and are more varied in the way that they will more varied in the way that, what I'll say, they'll be more varied in their application, which means that they're going to look a little bit different. They'll be more varied in terms of what particular element of the computing process would be important to the particular device that they're operating in. Okay. So some of the authors have said it's any computing system other than a general purpose computer. That works. A system consisting of hardware, software, and sometimes a real-time operating system. This is true. A real-time operating system is almost always an essential part of an embedded system. Any device that includes a programmable computer, but is not itself intended to be a general purpose computer, yeah, it'll work. There's a few others. There's many other different ways to define it. I think it is important to realize this RTOS, real-time operating system, is an important element. And again, they'll talk more about that in 311, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time in, well, yeah, what the heck, we got a minute or two extra tonight. So when we're talking about a real-time operating system, a lot of people are thinking that the thing has to go like really, really fast, okay? To do something in real time. That's not necessarily the case. In terms of a real-time operating system, it has to do it within the time frame that is required. So, for example, one of the reasons I give it, one of the examples I give of a real-time operating system that doesn't have to be very fast is your coffee maker. Okay, how many of you people have programmable coffee makers? You give me a thumbs up. Makes your coffee for you in the morning. You get up, it's already there. You or where you live. Somebody's got to have a programmable coffee maker. Come on. You guys don't drink coffee? What's wrong with you? Yeah, my parents. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. All right, they make coffee. Do they have their automatic coffee maker make it so that it's up when they get up in the morning? Aaron? They have like a timer on it. You may not know because you not be up when they get up in the morning. You mean dirty water? Okay. They just make it on the stove. All right. Well, they do have programmable coffee makers, right? So, and you guys know about these things anyway. You're young enough to know about these sorts of things. So, as long as when you get up in the morning, the coffee is there, okay, you can tell the coffee maker to start making it at, say, you guys get up at 9 o'clock in the morning. So you say at 9 o'clock, begin making the coffee. You're going to stumble out of bed. You're not going to be there in less than a second It can take you a minute or two to stumble out to the kitchen. And so if you tell us to start at 9 o'clock and you get up at 9 o'clock, you're going to have at least a few minutes for the coffee maker to turn on and get the coffee going for you, right? So in that case, a real-time operating system might be like 5 minutes long, right? Even have 10 minutes to get the coffee ready before you get out there to get it. All right, so a real-time operating system does not have to be in a fraction of a second. It can do it in a few minutes' time, and that's considered a real-time operating system. Now, if you've got anti-lock brakes and you go to step on those brakes because you hit a patch of ice, now you want a real-time operating system, but even then, it has a fraction of a second or so to make a decision that, oops, the car is skidding. I now need to start pulsing the brakes. And so it can do that in maybe a half a second or so, or a quarter of a second, or maybe even a tenth of a second. And if your computer is running on a clock that is, say, has it running at 20 megahertz, which is really pretty slow. But if it's running at 50 megahertz, that means it can do a computation every 20 nanoseconds. There's a lot of 20 nanoseconds that fits within the time frame of a tenth of a second. And I'll let you guys do the math to figure out what it is, but it's in a couple 100,000 range. So the computer has a couple 100,000, roughly, different steps it can execute and still get there in a tenth of a second. A tenth of a second is plenty fast enough. We're talking about a real-time operating system. We're not talking about something that's instantaneous. We're talking about something that fits within the required time frame of the system that it's operating in. Okay. Now you already got a little bit of pre-look at 311, and if they don't give this to you in 311, well then you'll have it from me and you'll be ready for it next semester. Okay. All right. Let's roll on ahead here. All right, so we talked about systems for dedicated functions. There's a single function sort of thing. It's a processor that has just a single task in life. And we mentioned two of them already, coffee maker and or anti-lock brakes. Typically, we would talk about a tightly constrained system, okay? When you go to design your computer system, when you guys get out of here for your company or whatever, they're going to want you to pay some close. Depends on the company you work for. If you work for the government, the cost isn't as big, although you do have to worry about that. Size and performance are pretty important, and power, it depends on what the application is. If it's going to be battery operated, then you got to watch pretty close. If it's going to be plugged into backbones, into a generator somewhere, then maybe you don't need to worry as much about power, or plugged into the wall. But again, most things these days are not taking, when talking about power, not a lot, an excessive amount. So, and then we talked about reactive time and real time. We talked about how you need to react within the time frame that's required. But also then you want to be able to get your design to market with some kind of a reasonable amount on this third bullet. Let's see, okay, this is the real time stuff I guess I was talking about earlier. Many systems must continually react to changes in the system's environment. They must compute certain results in real time without delay, e.g. a car cruise control. But again, even if it responds within a tenth of a second, which is probably faster than a human can, it still has a couple 100,000 operation or steps it can run in this program to get there. Okay. So anyway, again, there's some kind of sorts of things we're talking about, reactive and real-time kinds of sorts of responses. Design metrics. This one tends to show up in quizzes because I need to get something out of this first lecture on a quiz. And so it's not infrequently where I'll have a question where you pick out what you think are the top 4 most important design metrics, and put in the name of the metric and also then a brief description of it. And because I allow you to have you can copy it off of this form if you need, but you want to pick out the ones that you think are the top most important ones. And NRE is the amount of cost that you pay to engineers like you and I up front You have to get that money back when you sell the system at profit so that you can hire more engineers. But the non-recurring engineering cost is a very common expense. How much each unit costs, how big each unit is, that's going to not only, it's going to have an economic impact because it's how much space they need to store it and or how convenient it is for your users to have it. How quickly it runs, what kind of power it consumes, how flexible it is, how long is it going to take you to get your first widget out there so that you can compete with the other guys. If you get it out there first, then you've got a better chance of selling yours ahead of everybody else. How long, once you've got the first prototype out, how long is it going to take you to build a bunch of these things and get them sold? How difficult is it to maintain it? What kind of sort of accuracy you have with the device? Yes, it does, Ben. That's why I'm talking about what you think are the most important elements in the design metrics. And explain to me why you think they're important. I understand different people can have different reasons, and that's fine too, Ben. So we'll have a little flexibility with answering that. I'm not going to pick out the top 5 and tell you what they are. You're going to get to pick them out yourself. And then safety. Yeah, if you don't, if you're going to, somebody's going to depend on your anti-lock brakes and they don't use them very often, you want to make sure that when they do need them, they work. Or you could get in a lot of trouble and or the company you work for. All right, different types of processors. This one is the one almost all of us know and love these days. It's the microprocessor. It puts a single CPU on a single chip. Actually, there's a whole bunch of them out there that no longer put a single CPU on a chip. They put, what if they don't put a single CPU on the chip? Trick question. What do they put on the chip? A single chip. You guys go out and buy your processor for your motherboard. What were a couple of the features you had to get in that processor? Most of you got like it. Let's see. I used to call them quad core, but now there's how many cores are in that processor, right? So somebody go ahead and type in a number. Clock speed, cache, etc. 6 to 8 core, multi-threaded. Okay, multiple cores. Exactly, Kevin. That's what I'm looking for. So for those of you who built your own machine and you bought your own CPU, how many cores did you have on that CPU? I bet it was more than 1. 8. Okay, 6. Good. 6. 4. All right. 8. So there we got 6. All right. So it's no longer just a single CPU. It's 4 or 6 or 8 of these. You have multiple cores now on a single VLSI chip. And some of the old ones, we used to think it was really cool when you had a whole processor on a single chip. These days, again, you have a multi-core type device going on there. Speeds have kind of plateaued in terms of clock speeds, but in terms of multiple cores, that is still kind of growing as the size of the transistor shrinks. So these are some of the examples of microprocessors and then what they're used in, other than just their standard kinds of sorts of things. Now, microcontroller is an interesting device. Microcontroller is typically a single chip unit. It may only have a single core in it, but then instead of the single core, and you'll learn a lot more about the microcontrollers in CMP 311. But the idea is that the chip is specially designed to have additional information that additional parts to it that allow it to perform in other environments. Typically, you'll have a couple of timers that are added to a microcontroller. Typically, you'll have an analog to digital converter that's built in, or a digital analog converter that's kind of built in. These sorts of things will be available in a microcontroller that wouldn't necessarily be available to a microprocessor. And again, they typically have different special numbers on them. I believe the Atmel AVR is one of the devices that they use for the lab in CMP 311. So you could kind of, if you want to get a little peek around the corner at that for next semester, you could look that up a little bit. Again, they're particularly used for use in embedded systems like printers, your terminal machines, cameras, a lot of other devices. Your coffee maker will have a microcontroller in it. The other thing about a microcontroller is that you can buy them very simple, very small. Usually the programs they run are not very sophisticated. And so one of the things I've shown, I think, in 311 is I have a sheet where I've gone out and I've looked up some of the going prices on microcontrollers these days. A lot of them sell for under $1, 50 cents to a quarter for one of these things. Now, you're certainly not going to run Excel. You're not going to run at a high speed. You're not going to do any of this stuff. But in terms of doing the kinds of sorts of stuff that the printer needs to handle, yeah, you can do that. And or your camera or whatever, moving bits back and forth, that kind of thing. All right. So other processing chip types. Now, there are other processor chips that are out there. There's the single-purpose processor. That's kind of the one we're talking about, like a microcontroller. It's got a very specific application. Digital signal processor is a special chip, oftentimes a special processor. It's going to have more timers in it. It's going to have particularly some signal filters in it. So it's going to have some analog to digital conversion in it. For those of you who really want to get into some really cool, bend your brain around 17 ways from Sunday type processing, DSP is a cool course to take. For those of you who are more digital weenies and have difficulty with pi and circles and sine waves and cosine waves and so forth, and arc sines and arc cosines and logs and anti-logs, for those of you who have problems with those, stick to digital processing. But for those who think those things are kind of cool and you know who you are, I think you'll probably have at least as much fun with DSP as you will with regular processing. And so that's a very valuable skill to have. We like to hire DSP folks at Northrop, that's for sure. Then there's a processor. It's a chip. It doesn't necessarily have a processor in it, but it has a very specific application. And typically you're not going to find, you will find some of these guys out there. I guess the application-specific instruction set processors, you are finding more processors embedded in a lot of different sorts of things, microcontrollers, DSPs, these kinds of sorts of things. A programmable logic device and or field programmable gate array, FPGAs, and PLDs. Most of them are CPLDs, complex programmable logic devices these days. But they're very flexible. A CPLD is particularly cheap. They make kind of some good glue logic. You'll find more and OR gates in those and registers and that sort of kind of thing. They won't hold a whole lot, but generally they're a complex CPLD will hold, it'll be a very small FPGA. I've made my career in FPGAs. There's still a lot of gas left in them. They're kind of cool. There's a lot of flexibility that's built in, and they're programmable as well. And again, a lot of them also then have different processors built into them, higher end types FPGAs that we can work with there. And then finally, there's the pure ASIC, where you just put exactly what you're going to put on it. It may or may not have some kind of processing power built in, but they can get pretty sophisticated. There's an A12 SoC here, and this is the kind of block diagram, and then it's just basically, it's a bunch of transistors, and you can see little blobs of sorts of kinds of computing transistors doing different functions together here. So this is a picture of what one of the die looks like for this particular device, all right? So an ASIC or system on a chip kind of sort of thing. Those are kind of fun too. And we have a branch at Northrop that makes our own ASIC designs and so forth, and we build our own chips. Northrop has its own plant, its own chip plant. We manufacture, we take in the wafers. We don't do the wafers, but we buy the wafers and we can build our own ASICs custom. And that's just down by the airport. So it's just around, kind of at the other end of the road from UMBC. Actually, if some of you have an interest, maybe sometime as COVID winds down, I might be able to get you guys a tour through one of those clean rooms, and you can kind of see as they build the chips. We'll look into that maybe after midterm. Maybe somebody send me an email, remind me. I'll see if I can get you guys in. We'll know more at that point. All right, so there's a spectrum of different systems that can go into computers. And there's the disposable computers like in greeting cards, right? You guys have seen those at the drugstores. Microcontrollers, again, those are kind of cheaper. And you can buy those for a quarter or 50 cents or sometimes $1 or $2, depending on how sophisticated. Some of them run, you know, 10, 20, 30 bucks, but usually they're pretty cheap, actually. Desktop laptops and so forth are going to be a little lighter. Certainly, if you're going to start talking about building a server network, now you're talking about bigger and more expensive types of processing. The evolution of computers, you guys would probably recognize most of this. The funky part is I'm old enough to remember a lot of these things. For you guys, this is kind of where life started. I think most of you probably had your parents had a smartphone as you were growing up, I suppose, right? So that's a pretty sophisticated device. I remember when I saw my first smartphone. And it was before the public did too. Remember laptops? I remember my personal computer when it used to look like that. In fact, I've still got a couple of them back in my, I keep around for archive purposes, just for fun, I guess. This is an interesting kind of sort of reflection here. Back in the 1950s, that was when the very first transistor came out. And at that point, it wasn't even on a single substrate. The very first one was a couple of pieces of P material and N material, and then they just physically squished those things together with a vise, I think, if I remember correctly. And that actually took place just north of here in Pennsylvania, in Allentown, Pennsylvania, for those of you who are looking for some interesting history. And it was at Bell Laboratories. And they were the first folks to come up with the transistor. And then in the 1960s, they were able to put 16-hole transistors on a single chip. Even into the early 70s, we were still working with some of these things. TTL, they had a whole bunch of different families that they used to put out and had different gates and groups of gates and so forth. By the 1970s, now it's the end of the 1970s before you get an 8-bit microprocessor. In the mid to, I think it was like, I don't remember when it was, 73, 74, I got to go look it up, is when the first 4-bit microprocessor came out. A few more transistors to support that. 1980s, now we're starting to get a little bit more to bring more to the party. Around 275,000 transistors. By the 90s, we're at 3 million. By the 2000s, we're at almost 1 billion transistors. And by 2010, we've got 8 billion transistors on a single chip. And now we pack, this would be a single core. This would be a single core. Now, if you've got like 6 or 8 or 4 cores, you've got, take that 8 and multiply it by 6, and that's probably at least how many transistors that you have on the processor that you bought and put into your own machine. So, they call it Moore's Law. He suggested it in 1975. The density of how many transistors you can put on a chip doubles about every 2 years. I'm not sure if that's been holding completely true, but there in fact is a table here to sort of show some of this. And this is a log scale. On a log scale, if you double every so often, you're going to get a straight line. And so this is kind of some of the sorts of things. These are some of the older machines. We're going to be looking at 386s and 486s. I think we'll even talk about the 8086 in this class, but that's already, what, 40 years old now? Some of them 35 to 40 years old. But again, we're doing this to make it easier for you guys, like it or not. The clock speeds, like I said, you'll notice those are started kind of plateauing right now. And then the amount of power that they put out, fortunately, that has plateaued as well, probably largely because the speed is plateauing. Let's see, the physical size of the chip has stayed pretty much the same. It's just the number of transistors that you can put on that physical chip changes. There's reasons, depending on impurities in the chip and so forth, as to why you don't want them to get too big. And at one point, they were thinking what they called wafer scale integration, where you use the whole wafer of a chip, which seems to make sense. But the problem is that you have what's called impurities in any given wafer. And statistically, there's going to be about a half a dozen of them on any given wafer. And that means there's going to be a half a dozen pieces of the when you put down your chip that you're going to have to throw away. And so if the chip gets too big, then you're going to be throwing away a larger number of chips. If you think about that, I'll let you guys kind of do the mental image on that. So there's kind of, you don't want the physical side of the size of the chip itself to get too big, or you start to have to throw more of them away on a given wafer. All right, so we're getting into the end here. I got one more story to tell you here at the tail end, and we'll let you go after we get into this. But here's how the chip, there we go. There's the 4004. That's the 4-bit first microprocessor chip. Came out in 71. I guess I was off in early 70s. 72, you have the first 8008, first 8-bit microprocessor. The number of transistors that you have to support these different things. The Core i7, I suspect that a lot of you that built your machines, did you use an i5 or an i7? Go ahead and type it on the chat. Maybe you used an i9. I don't know. What core? I'm assuming you used an Intel core. i7, AMD. Okay, bless your heart, Ben. I see some i7s and i5. Oh, there's this optimistic soul. i7, and there's several different classes of i7 too, the 960 and so forth. So the first i7 came out almost 9 years ago now, but they've been upgrading them. Okay, good. So again, there's several different generations of the i7. They had code names as they were building them. And then kind of the processing that we've had in them. And this chart's going backwards from the one on the previous page. 2015 is the latest information that I have on this table here. But then again, there's also an i5. I saw somebody talked about an i5. They even have an i3 out there, but those don't get used very often unless you really got something that's not necessarily the top of the line. All right, so we got 5 minutes left. So let me tell my quick little story here, and then I'll let you go maybe a minute or two early. I'm always amazed at how everybody wants to get out early from the class, which is why this is a good thing to be talking about at this point in time. For those of you who want to get out early, okay, you're thinking, hey, I got 5 minutes. I got an extra 5 minutes, right? The problem is that you're not getting your money's worth. If you stick around and let me tell you the whole lecture, and I go over a little bit, I'm actually giving you more for your money, right? So one time I went about 10 minutes over, and one of the students came up to me and smiled after class, and he said, you know, Professor Smith, you really gave us our money's worth tonight. Okay, so I'll cheat you a little bit out of your money. I'll let you go 4 minutes early. We talk more about that humor tomorrow night, or on Tuesday. I'll see you all. I'll let you all go. And again, no discussion Friday, no lab on Friday tomorrow. It will be starting up on Friday next week. That's all I got to say. I'll let you out 3.5 minutes early. Thanks for being here with me, guys. We'll see you later. One more time. Where will this video be posted? I think that who was it that was doing it for the IEEE? Tell you what, for the guy, yeah, okay, thank you. IEEE Discard, that's Alana. Post it on YouTube and then give it on the IEEE Discord. Okay. And Sean, can you do me a favor? Send me the link for where the IEEE Discord is. Email that to me. I'll forward that around to everybody else. Okay? Okay, there it is right there. Good. Thank you. Discord, you go to just click on Discord from here. There's the Discord. Email it to you. Okay, all right. Seems like I need a little bit more for that web page thing to work. Okay, I got it. You need to sign up to get it. Okay, that makes sense. All right, very good.